Welcome to In the Gutter, a podcast that is all comics, all bangers, all the time, with story expert Lani, Diane, Rich, and superhero scholar Joshua Unruh. One of the hosts has read almost no superhero comics, and the other has read almost all of them. We'll let you sort out which is which. And now, In the Gutter.
All right, so I just went on this completely ridiculous road trip. A couple of weeks ago, I gave everybody homework for the Year of Writing Magically workshop where I was think about the things that, boost your creativity and the things that drain you and go ahead and adjust your life accordingly. And the big focus was on adjusting the things that are draining, and so I went through and I did that. And then I thought, Elisa, who, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Elisa Whitney, who's my co-host on Endless, the Sandman podcast, was interviewing Neil Gaiman at the Woodstock Book Fest in Woodstock, New York, which is right where I'm from. I grew up there. So, or in that area anyway. And so I decided, all right, road trips are excellent for my creativity and for getting the book going and all of this kind of stuff. I am going to drive from Colorado to New York and back.
Sure.
And this, the thing is, along the way, Kelly Jones lives in Missouri. So I stopped over in Missouri and hung out with her for a little bit, went and picked up my kid in Columbus. There are all these stops, very, equally distant along the way where I could just stop in Columbus, picked up my kid, brought my kid to the town where I grew up and was wandering through this town, showing them all the places, telling them all the stories, everything, and going to the pizza place where I had my first date, which literally has not changed to the point where the guy behind the counter was the same dude. Same dude. So that was totally weird. But we stayed on this farm that was right around the corner from where I grew up. And I used to love that farm. And they had a record player there. Now, my kid, having been born in the 90s, right, was I don't even know, what is this? What is this record player? What is this thing? And so
it's like a laser disc
oh,
minus the laser. And you know what? I just dated myself with laser disc also.
Right, for that 15 minutes in 1996 when laser discs were a thing, right? Technology has moved so fast. But, when we were kids, when we were little, that was what you had. You had record players, you cassette tapes, And so so they were really excited about it. So we ended up going to this bookstore in Rhinebeck, New York. We picked up Leonard Cohen Greatest Hits original vinyl. And we went back to the place and that night and we sat down with this record player. Now, this record player is super cheap and clearly there for decoration, as they did not actually have any vinyl in the place where we were staying.
Right.
But we had this experience where I was explaining to them, okay, so this is how a record player works and this is what you do. And that sound, that is the record scratch that you hear all the time and had absolutely no context for. I was this is how it works, yada yada.
Oh yeah, pop hiss, baby, pop hiss.
Oh my goodness! And at one point, the record needle was skimming the surface, and I was oh, that's when you tape a nickel to the top. Of the needle, right, to put a little extra weight down. We were going through this whole thing. It was such a wonderful experience, and then I left because I don't have a record player. I'm never going to use this album, right? But I left it there because I'm people who stay here should have the opportunity to listen to Leonard Cohen in the original vinyl.
But what a vibe check.
Such an experience.
That you just leave behind the universal experience of people who stay in this barn should be Leonard Cohen's greatest hits. I'm not saying whether you're right or wrong. I'm just saying what the boldness, the audacity of this decision that you're just I've taken it into my hands. Deal with it, friends.
It's absolute fucking poetry. Here's the thing. I am not going to argue that Leonard Cohen is a great singer. I think that covers of his stuff usually end up better than
that seems wise.
Original.
Yes.
But he is a goddamn poet. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Save my soul, Leonard Cohen. That was amazing. So it was such a great experience. It was so much fun. And now there's this album in this little barn out on a farm. And when people come to stay there in the Airbnb, That's going to be like my little contribution. Also, we left my kid's coat there. So if there's ever a very small person who needs a coat who stays there, then they can have my kid's coat.
Legacy.
I'm telling you, it's all about leaving a piece of yourself behind, the way that we do in these podcasts. How you like that segue?
That's right. Take only pictures and leave only footprints, and also Leonard Cohen albums. As you venture into the mountains to steal a cosmic cube from your best friend turned worst enemy, obviously.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think that should slide us right into the summary really well. Jack, roll the summary music. In Captain America, Winter Soldier number 14, we pick up where we left off with the Winter Soldier taking a shot at Falcon's head. But when he looks through the scope to survey the damage, all he sees is a broken tree branch. He moves the scope over to Cap and sees the shield flying at him just before he gets cracked in the head with it. Bucky escapes into the compound with the cosmic cube, and Cap goes in chase after him while Falcon deals with the guys outside. Sharon calls through Cap's comms and says she's a couple minutes out and that there are underground tunnels. He needs to stop the Winter Soldier from getting away with the cube. Cap goes after the Winter Soldier and they fight. Cap tries to remind the Winter Soldier of who he really is, but the Winter Soldier refuses to see it. Cap finally says, "Fine, if you don't remember who you are, then kill me." The Winter Soldier takes aim and fires, but Cap throws his shield, blocks the shot, and knocks the pack off the Winter Soldier's back. The cosmic cube tumbles to the ground, and so does the Winter Soldier, as the memories flood back in. Sharon shows up, but Cap tells her to hold her fire. The man who killed Tapper isn't in there anymore. In a moment of fury and anguish, Bucky grabs the cube and says that all those people are dead for this damn thing, and he crushes it in his hand. In a blinding flash of blue light, the cube is destroyed and Bucky is gone. Cap doesn't know where Bucky is, but he knows he's not dead. He's a survivor. We see Bucky walking through Camp Lehigh at night, remembering the moment he first met Cap, the moment when he was so happy to greet a future that would turn out so bleak. He falls to his knees in the dark and says, "You're a fool." In a coda, we're back with Lucan, who is staring out the window as the taunting voice in his head, well, taunts. We see him looking at the reflection of the voice telling him he was weak to get rid of the cube. And it's Red Skull. Because of course it is. Oh my God, Joshua, here we are, the last issue in this arc, which we started at the beginning of season 1 of In the Gutter, and now are closing season 2 of In the Gutter with it. What do you think of this issue?
I mean, it's a big finale that feels suitably big, right? I mean, we got Cap's old best partner, his new best partner, the soldier's moment of hesitation, but he still pulls the trigger, the near miss. Oh, and I don't know about my personal favorite, but definitely a thing that took me almost as much by surprise the first time I read it. The revelation that the skull isn't so much back as the bastard never left. Fantastic.
You know, I love that. In that moment, and in the first issue, I think it was the first issue, right, where Red Skull is set up as the villain and then taken out entirely. And so in that moment, I was like, wow, what a bold move to kill your antagonist and then slide somebody else into that space and yada, yada, yada. And of course it was him. We're going to talk about that a little bit, about the predictability thing, but like, I don't even care. It was predictable. I still missed it. It was an awesome reveal. And I love the callback to the reflections. I think it was great. I mean, we've got Bucky's back, which sets us up for more great stories in the future as he processes what he's done. And that means we'll probably get a meaningful reunion eventually, which of course I'm very much looking forward to. The reveal of Lucan's inner tormentor as the Red Skull, again, this huge moment that like you should have seen coming. Every time I saw this disembodied voice talking to Lucan, the fact that it didn't even occur to me that it was a Red Skull, even though I think that was pretty damn obvious. But I'm glad Brubaker got it past me. But I think that even if you're somebody that saw that coming a million miles away, it was still really beautifully executed. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've actually had something like the experience of the original readers in a way. Like, we've read each set of issues more quickly, but 15 issues, that's a year and a third. And that was literally a year and a third of time between the rug getting yanked out from under us and this
reveal. And while, Lucan's inner voice was there off and on, actually it was there, I mean, almost every time we saw him in one way or another, but he was used so sparingly that it never hung a lampshade on it. I mean, like he never Lucan also never went away, really, but also would just bubble up now and then. Which, and we'll talk some more about this, but like throws light backwards on just who it was that gave Cap the file.
Yeah.
Like it really, there is a moment where you're like, oh, that changes a bunch of stuff subtly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a neat device to use, and it was so nicely done, and there's so much other stuff going on. Like, you're so focused on Bucky, and the thing is that even when Lucan wasn't around, like, Bucky was the influence of the antagonist. You don't need your antagonist to be physically present, just the influence of the antagonist and what's going on. And Bucky was very much that influence. I mean, back through the generations, through Karpov, through everything, it was all of these antagonists, dead and alive, still tormenting Cap. So I think that was just beautifully done. I think that that all of this is a really great finale with a nice setup for future stories to be told. And I mean, absolutely. What more can you ask for?
No, it's true. And I mean, the jumping off of we're gonna shift, if you kept reading after this, we're gonna shift to the Crossbones and Sin stuff for a while. So like that is a B plot that was simmering along. That's going to be the A plot now. Lucan's going to have a bit of a backseat, but never go away because that's still floating around. But his red right hand is gone. What does that mean? Yeah, there's just a million things to do from here. And which comes back to just me being very impressed with serialized storytelling done well. Because again, modern superhero comics, they nod a lot of nodding at serialization without really committing. But obviously this just goes for it with an A, a B, a C, and a D plot, and they all just kind of shift around over the course of years. And this was our first, year and a bit of it. Good stuff.
It is absolutely excellent. I loved it. All right, so I have to say, like, we've had a lot of covers and we've had mixed reactions to some. Some of them were like, it's like your standard, superhero shots. Some of them were really interesting. I cannot even tell you how much I love when I finished reading the last issue. I flipped ahead just a little bit because I try not to spoil myself. Also because I will forget which details in which issue and then screw it up and bring in the wrong thing. But yeah, like I skipped ahead just enough to see the cover and to have that old style 1940s cover, and then you've got modern Cap and Bucky facing off over the images of themselves. They're standing in this white limbo, like there's nothing grounding any of this. This is just this experience for them, and superimposed over their old selves, their previous versions of themselves, which are unrecognizable to who they both are now. And when you look at those old selves and you think, oh my God, the shit you are going to go through, looking at those innocent little, faces that are just like, we're going to punch some Nazis, it's such a beautiful contrast. I love this cover. I think it's my favorite in the run.
It's really great. And you actually pointed something out that I hadn't made a connection to that now has me kind of reevaluating lots of stuff. You pointed out this like slow fade into featureless white, this limbo, this unknown. So up top we have the past, in the middle we have the present, and the future is just like hell if I know. Right? Like everything's
and they're falling
be
downward into it. It kind of feels like gravity is pulling them down into this space, and who knows what defines that space.
And there's like a cracked mirror thing going on because the Cap is on the right and Bucky's on the left in the past. Cap is on the left and Winter Soldier's on the right in the present. And then who the hell knows after that? It's we've seen this juxtaposition of like original classic style art with Bucky before, and it worked just as beautifully. Bringing Captain America into this and sort of dramatizing their whole relationship with that contrast, really great. Really great stuff on
Yeah.
this cover.
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely fabulous. But yeah, okay, so we're going to get started. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. There's a lot of really deep themes going on in here. But you mentioned earlier that, that the Red Skull influence on Lucan reframes who gave Cap the file.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we have the moment where Lucan is frantically searching for the file, right? Are we are we thinking that Red Skull gave him the file?
That's what I've been thinking for
Used
a while.
Lucan to give him the file. Oh, so is that never answered? Is that just a theory? Do we ever get a solid answer on that?
Now that you say that, because I have read this a couple times, but not super recently, I'm not sure that that's ever made explicit. I really am not sure. I mean, I think it's pretty on the label because now that you know the Red Skull's in there. And part of the reason I think it's on the label is Brubaker is really good at quietly upping the stakes. Like, Lucan has had an awful voice in his head and has been a little unstable and made some poor decisions, but we are not given any kind of indication that Skull has been taking over, at least that Lucan can tell. But here we have this moment that Lucan does not recall, and this is the Skull gets to fuck with the person he's imprisoned within and his greatest enemy with the same move, with taking over just long enough or doing it when Lucan's paying attention to something else. I don't know, exactly how this two minds in one body in a cosmic cube thing works, but yeah, I think it's pretty clear, at least to me. Red Skull did it, and he did it because it shits in Lucan's cereal and Cap's at the same time.
And it just speaks to that efficiency of villainy,
That's
right? Why
whatever else we can say about Nazis.
You can torment 5, right?
Yes. Very efficient, very good files, and that means he's going to be like, well, how can I? I'm not doing a German accent. I refuse to do it. But that answers the question. What's the maximum fuckery I can get up to in one deft maneuver? And there it is.
I love it. I love it. So let's talk a bit about Red Skull. I mean, Red Skull is a presence in the beginning, clearly a presence all throughout, but maybe we don't really know how much of a presence he is until this last, reflection at the end, and the faces reflected over each other, the Red Skull reflecting back through the glass, beautifully calls back to that original artwork from the first issue of Cap and Red Skull, right? So let's have a little chat about Red Skull. What do you want to say about Red Skull?
Well, I just wanted to address some things like the file, and like at the very beginning in our first season, I said, pay attention to this reflection. It's not going to be constant, but when it comes back, it's going to be big. And, and here it is. And the idea that it never occurred to many of us that the evil voice in Lucan's head could be anything other than Lucan, right? Like maybe the cosmic cube is dragging him, into a darker place and kind of personifying those dark thoughts. Maybe that's what it is, but it's not like he's a good dude. Clearly he has dark thoughts, and then at the end to go, oh shit, they are the darkest thoughts. And in fact, Lucan, it kind of, again, casts that light backwards. Like, Lucan has been struggling. Clearly Lucan knows and has known most of the time that it was Red Skull, and just somewhere between refused to deal with it and dissiociated. I mean, I think it's important that we, the readers, never saw him dealing with it. We saw him ignoring the voice or telling it to shut up, but it was like he was trying to deprive it of light and air, and maybe it would go away, and clearly that ain't working out. It really is, it changes everything that happened before subtly, but doesn't it's not sort of a real sort of Sixth Sense or whatever attempt at a twist. It's a much more subtle, like, ripples backwards, like, oh damn, that thing is, oh damn, that, and of course, going forward, we know Lucan is a principled villain, so it's not going to be easy on him having what would he refer to him only as sadist and fascist the entire time. Not a comfortable space, for Lucan.
Right. But, Lucan dipped his toe in that pool.
No, there's both the monkey's paw
where he is. Yeah.
of the cosmic cube, right?
Yep.
Which is what did it to both of them. They are both, what you know, Red Skull's like, you're lucky that I'm not the only one in here if there'd been any more juice in that cube. And Lucan's like, oh, no, buddy, we're now stuck with each other. We are each other's prison, actually.
Exactly.
You know? Like so you've really got this combination of the monkey's paw of the cosmic cube with this idea that superhero comics really like to play with, this Nietzsche quote of when you stare into the abyss also stares back into you, which is kind of interesting with Lucan because he's clearly an abyss. But we are led to believe that the Red Skull is a worse abyss, you know, and they're staring into one another. Amazing.
Okay, so one of the things too, I've definitely talked about this a lot in Still Pretty, you know, my Buffy podcast, because within the world of Buffy, guns are typically dismissed, reviled, usually not used. When they are used, it is always a disaster. And so my read on that has always been about the essential unearned power of a gun, that like all you have to be able to do to suddenly increase your power dramatically is pick up a gun.
Yes.
And I mean, even if you're not good with it, if you're not skilled with it, like if you pick up something that has a lot of power, that machine gun or something like that, you can still do an incredible amount of damage and instill an incredible amount of fear and terror. So guns as a representative of unearned power, I think is really interesting. And here, you know, in the Buffy universe where power is, you know, like she's a chosen one, so she just kind of got the power, but also she develops it, she works with it, she trains, she uses it responsibly, she thinks about the ethics of how she uses it and when she uses it. She chooses those moments really carefully. That is an earned power. I think that with superheroes too, some of them just get hit by gamma rays and then turn into big green hulks. Like shit happens, right? You know, if you're a scientist, that apparently in the universe is just a thing that happens. But once you get that power, though, you know, I mean, good God, like we always come back to Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility.
Right, yeah.
Is something that I think is deeply woven into like superhero storytelling. That whether or not a character wanted this power or pursued this power or whatever, once they have it, they are responsible for it and they're responsible for how they use it, right? So here we have a situation where we have like all of these, you know, bad guys with guns, right?
Right.
But the heroes don't. Now, S.H.I.E.L.D. will come in, guns a-blazing.
Well,
but
you said heroes.
Exactly. I was going to say, where S.H.I.E.L.D. falls on the hero-villain spectrum is definitely something that is up for debate. And also, I think, kind of interesting when you are thinking about S.H.I.E.L.D. and how many questions we have about the ethical, you know, function of S.H.I.E.L.D. But ethics, when you are given superpowers, I think are really super important. So villains are using guns, villains are shooting, you know, the Winter Soldier's shooting with a gun, right?
Yeah.
Our heroes do not. Cap has the shield, which he uses to like throw out, knock people down. You know, I always come back though, like to that from a couple of issues ago, that scene on the bridge where the zombie, you know, people were coming and he throws that shield and beheads a bitch. Like that is the most, you know, visceral violence I've seen come from. Usually it's just a hubcap that's knocking people down, like,
right,
you know, just tracking bullets and all that kind of stuff. But you know, like Falcon is flying at people, he's punching with his fists. They have guns, and he is beating the shit out of them with his fists and being okay. Cap is throwing a shield at people and deflecting the bullets. I find that kind of interesting, and as I don't know as much about superheroes, like, is this a theory that holds any water about the earned and unearned power and where guns fall on that spectrum? Do you think that that's something they're deliberately doing?
Oh, I think that's 100% been a thing that superheroes are doing and then surpassing. So guns fit this really interesting space where for any average, you know, hood who just picks up a gun, now they're more dangerous than the guy who just, and I'm going way back. I'm for superhero stuff, we're going to start with 1939, 1940, honestly. Both because superheroes, like, that's where the root is, and they never entirely outgrow where they started, right? But I also think Marvel does things a little differently, and then this story is doing things a little differently. So there's a few things going on. So if you go all the way back, it's 1930, it's 1940. Hoods pick up a gun. Now they're more dangerous than the guy with the blackjack or the brass knuckles or whatever. Our superheroes, however, cannot have to care about guns. Like, beating people who have guns has to be you are this tall to ride for superheroes. Right. If you can't handle one random dude with a gun, hang up your tights.
These were like 12 dudes with machine guns, though, and Falcon was just like, yeah, come at me. You know? Yes, because that's how it has to be. So again, our first two superheroes, Superman and Batman. One of the two creators of Superman lost his father to gun violence, and because they owned a pawn shop and they were robbed, and he was shot and died in broad daylight. It is not surprising to me that the hero that these two young men created together at a very uncertain time for Jewish young men in this country, at a very uncertain time for middle and lower class or, poor people. They lost their livelihood the day that dad got shot in the pawn shop, that kind of thing. It's not surprising to me that the hero these two young men come up with is entirely bulletproof, like from jump. Right. And then our second hero now, Batman, has a few stories where at the very beginning where he is a gun-toting vigilante because they were barely not ripping off the Shadow, who is a gun-toting vigilante. But very quickly, the vow to not use guns is like a secondary vow to warring on crime, right? And I think that you and I, in an episode of Listen Up A-Holes, I talked about how much I really appreciate the opening credits to Batman the Animated Series, because you get everything you need to know about Batman with amazing orchestral music going on. And one of the things is two guys pull guns on him and he hits them with boomerangs and then knocks them out. And the point being, he's better than a gun, right? Like, no gun brings you to the level of Batman. So there's both an element of unearned power because we have to deal with these people with guns, but it's also you must be this tall. A guy with a gun cannot be too much trouble for you, right? It just can't. Right.
You see this in Captain America, actually. If you look at the costume, the kind of classic costume, he is a knight, swashbuckler, gloves and boots. He's got the shield. He's a knight who has no offensive weaponry. He can throw the shield, don't get me wrong, but that came along a little later, actually. The original imagery is a knight who is all protect, no attack. Very much a view we wanted to have of ourselves as Americans in America and the American military in the 40s. Now, Marvel, though, is kind of interesting because guys with guns, first of all, they start in the same place that DC starts, right? Peter Parker loses his uncle to gun violence. Cap's in a war, which is a lot of guns, but it's still guns. He mostly spends his time fighting things more serious than guns. But as we move forward in time, right, especially we get into the 70s and 80s, we start getting these introductions of guys like the Punisher, who are now super people with guns, sorta. And then the 90s becomes a very militarized time when a lot of people's powers were, but I have guns and a lot of them. I mean, So, and that took hold more in Marvel than it did in DC. And then last of all these things, you have the Winter Soldier story, which is trying to be more grounded a more grounded superhero story. So it has to be important and impactful when S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up, even though they are, strictly speaking, just a bunch of well-informed people with guns, But what do we see from our heroes? Our heroes still stay in that kind of traditional, we don't use guns, because that's what bad guys do. It's really fascinating in this story specifically that you have the root of this, which is we don't use guns. That's what bad guys do. At the same time that Captain America and Sam are running around, Cap and Falcon are running around with a bunch of people who are carrying guns. It's not what this story's about, so they don't really like look super closely at it, but I really love that I've imprinted enough on you that you're thinking about that contrast.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I've been thinking about that in stories a lot, especially given the real serious problems that we have in this country with gun violence. And the fact that the bad guys in comics, for the most part, of course there are exceptions. It's been 80 years of comic book storytelling.
Right.
They're going
Exception to every
exceptions.
rule.
Exactly. But mostly it's heroes. Real heroes don't use guns.
Yeah.
Bad guys use guns. And that consistency in that presentation, of that dichotomy is something that I would hope would absorb more in some areas of our culture. But yeah, like the unearned power that comes with picking up a gun and how you just can't have any respect for that. Like there are people out there who will know how to use a gun, who are very, very careful with them, who respect what they do and respect the power that they have. And people who don't shoot other people with guns, people who feed their family because they shoot something with a gun, fine.
Sure.
But at the same time, like the problem that we have, oftentimes you can find, when I talk about the stories in our culture, the stories in our culture reflect us back at us, right? And I think that the thing that superhero comics try to do is reflect the best of us back at us.
Very often,
And what I find interesting is that the best of us does not use guns.
Yeah.
They earn their power. And I've always I really liked and respected that in superhero storytelling. And even though that's not the point of this, and that's not what they meant to do, and that's not what this is about at all, it's still there. And that's when you know that there is that part of us that knows, like within us, within our culture, part of us knows, that this is not what heroes do. So I find that kind of interesting. In the storytelling, this moment, so this moment happens, right, where it's Red Skull staring back at Lucan. And I'm like, oh God. Like, I mean, I didn't even think about it. I was like, duh, and so in the moment I was like, okay, I missed it. Fine. That is completely a predictable outcome. Like anybody who sat and thought about it for even a minute and who had read maybe the first set of comics a little bit, with less of an interstitial than maybe I did, but still like, oh my God, of course it's going to be Red Skull in the Cosmic Cube that got passed down. Yes, of course the voice is going to be Red Skull, right? And then I was like, well, okay, fine. Like I didn't see it. I think probably most readers probably did have that suspicion, especially savvy comic book readers probably would have had that suspicion given the way everything was laid out. But then I was thinking about predictability as a criticism in storytelling, and how I think predictability is like the worst criticism you can make in storytelling. Yeah. It has nothing to do with anything. So like, I'm not the kind of person who will ever say, well, that was predictable, like as a criticism. This was predictable. It was absolutely laid out there. I didn't see it. So for me, it was a twist. But I think even if it wasn't a twist, even if you knew that was coming, this would still be an incredibly enjoyable and like satisfying moment in the storytelling. And the thing is that like a really good twist can be a great pleasure in storytelling to not see that coming. But it is one of a million pleasures. Like, we knew how all of this was going to work out, right? We knew that Cap was going to not kill Bucky. We knew that Cap was going to, give Bucky himself back. We knew all of this was going to happen. It's still destroying to see it happen. When he falls to his knees and you see all the memories behind him, it's devastating, and the fact that we knew that was going to happen doesn't make that any less devastating. Living through these moments with these characters is the point of fiction. And this is why, people are always talking about, oh, that was predictable, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is, like, if you read the same story more than once because you love it, then its predictability is not the reason why you go there.
Yeah,
Like, you go there for the experience of that story. And once you know what happens, if that's the only thing that story has to offer, you'll never go back to it again. But this is something that I could see going back to over and over and over again, regardless of whether you know what's going to happen or not. So basically, I'm just making my standard argument that knowing what's going to happen, knowing that Cap is going to save Bucky, no matter how much we saw him flailing with what to do before.
Right. Yeah.
You knew what Cap was going to do. You knew how this was going to end. And yet it's still wonderfully executed and completely emotionally devastating, which is what you want.
Exactly. Yes. And I actually think there's sort of two different types of predictability. And I think that the Red Skull reveal is the much more difficult one to pull off, which is the one where, in retrospect, this was obvious, but it wasn't actually obvious all along. In retrospect, it is. You're like, oh, yeah. I mean, no spotlight was shown on it, but I certainly had all the pieces. You know, I could have made this guess reasonably, but now that it's revealed, of course it was. And the other one is, well, I saw the end coming the whole time. And as you say, that's all. Most of the time, that's just like good writing. Like, if I know what's going to happen, that means this person understands how stories are put together, you know.
Exactly. And where the value in the story is, which is not in the twist, you know. So, I mean, having these two things right side by side, that you know what Cap is going to do, and yet it still devastates you. And that looking back, you're like, oh, of course it was Red Skull. Right.
Yeah.
I think that to me is like one of the best ones. I love when a writer slides one past me like that and is like, here are all of the pieces, but they do this sleight of hand so that you're looking somewhere else at that moment and you're not really putting all of that together. I mean, that's just genius. That's beautifully done.
It absolutely is. And it brings me to a conversation I literally had this week. I was talking with a friend of mine. I was a little disappointed in them, honestly, that they were complaining that one of the Star Wars shows that used characters who were going to be important in stories that were the future of the series, that was, you know, we did a new series, but there is a future in the fiction we know they're going to be in, right? And this friend of mine was like, there's no stakes because of that. And I was like, that's ridiculous. That's not how this works, right? Like, you're already in a heavily genred space, and most of the time in the heavily genred spaces, like superheroes, like space opera, you already know, as you're talking about, we knew what was going to happen broadly. We had no idea how it was going to happen. That's the interesting bit. Like, how does the win happen? We know they're going to win. How many times do you say in JLA? Well, JLA is on the cover, so I'm reasonably certain they're going to come out on top. Yeah. It's the how.
Not the point.
Right? It's the how. Point. And and if you ever get what might feel like a reasonable complaint about predictability, it's probably that the how wasn't that clever either, right? Like, it's the road that got us to the destination we knew was not scenic enough, as opposed to there was a problem with the destination. And so, like literally this week, that's what I've been arguing already, is that, like, no, man, come on, just because you don't think that they're gonna die, that was seriously all the only stakes you can think of. That's the saddest thing in the world, you know. Right. There are way worse stakes, way deeper things at play.
Culturally, I think we are trained by this, parade of content, right? There is we have more content available to us in more forms and in more ways now than ever before in human history. I mean, content is huge, you know, and people are churning through it at such a rate that I think that they are simply looking for that one thing, like that I didn't see that coming, you know, that I didn't know that this was going to happen. But the fact of the matter is, it is about the how. It is about how you get there. It is about, like, what happens in those moments and how those moments evolve. And we don't recognize that is why we're here, not necessarily for how it's all going to end. It's the same idea that that, you know, something only matters if it lasts forever. You know, like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
fact that we are all, here on a rock that eventually is going to get swallowed by the sun, and no evidence that we ever existed will ever, last or whatever. But for some reason, we're all chasing this immortality of, work that people will remember, or like, whatever. But it's really not about that. Like, everything is about the now. This is the most important moment. And we are always so distracted by looking to whatever is going to happen next that we're not really living in this particular moment now. And that's true, I think, in life, and it's true in storytelling, and what is it? Like, honestly, two of the things that I quote the most when I'm talking about anything, are both from Joss Whedon. And I find it really irritating. Although one of them is Tim Minear on a Joss Whedon show. So fine. But one of them is from the Angel series, like the Buffy spinoff Angel, where we have Angel saying, if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do. Again, that was written by Tim Minear, but it was on a Joss Whedon show. And then, of course, like from Age of Ultron, right? A thing isn't beautiful because it lasts.
Yeah.
A thing is beautiful because it exists in this moment, and it's beautiful. And learning to exist in this now and be in this now. And even though you know what's going to happen, that there are things in the now that are worth enjoying and appreciating, I think like is really, really true in storytelling. And I kind of hope that is, as we become, as a culture, much more story savvy because we are consuming so much more content. I hope that is somewhere that we eventually get to where people are not trying to preserve the twist at all costs in their storytelling, because it really is not the essential experience of any story is what we don't know about how it's going to work out. But the other thing that I saw here that I thought was really interesting are the trauma narratives and the duality of self.
Yes.
Having been through, some trauma in my life, I can say that when you're living through an extracted and prolonged trauma, like Bucky is as the Winter Soldier, that you do, I mean, at least my experience, you do split into two selves. There's the one that knows what's going on and that is clear on everything. And then there's the one that survives, right? And the one that survives will actively suppress the one that knows, And
that's how the surviving
trauma
happens in the moment.
That's
is literally the method. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly it. And then once you're freed from that, right? Once you don't have to suppress it in order to survive, there is this process of reintegration that is wildly painful. It is so difficult. And I would say, like, out of all the things that were really, really hard with that experience, like that may have been one of the most difficult things for me to go through, was to realize that I myself had participated to a certain degree because I couldn't do anything, because I wouldn't allow myself to do anything, because I wouldn't allow myself to recognize what was happening. And as I see Bucky, this moment of Bucky collapsing to the ground as he goes through this reintegration, as he realizes who he was, even though part of him knew, part of him went back to New York, part of him was reaching for this all along, the part of him that knew was always in there. But that moment was so valuable because walking a character through the path of reintegration shows a potential path to readers who are in a similar emotional state of being split or early in that process. And again, like, this is what I think is so incredibly valuable about fiction and about these stories, is that you torment these characters so that you can walk them through that healing process, and that a lot of times that's a lot of what we go to fiction for. I mean, honestly, like, one of the things that I teach writers is that you have to know how to torment your characters. Do not pull your punches. Do not make life easier for them. Make it harder and harder and harder and harder until they learn a goddamn thing, And I mean, that's something that you need to do in fiction, because I think that's what we need in fiction. We need fiction to help us walk through these things that sometimes in our lives are too difficult, too complex, too much, and when you look at it through one lens, of Bucky reintegrating into himself, you can handle that, through Bucky, and Bucky becomes a vessel for healing, which I think is amazing. And I love that we see this in You know, in a comic book, it
Yeah.
drives me crazy how comic books are so often dismissed as a form of narrative and a form of art and all of that. When the reality is, it's some of the most sophisticated and
It
powerful
absolutely can be.
storytelling
Yeah.
that I've seen. I think it's just absolutely incredible. And so I would like to just like put my hands together for this fucking shit. Because, oh my God, that was an amazing moment.
A thing that you said that stuck with me a lot is that fiction's not about how it is, it's about how it feels.
Yes.
And having gone through my own very, very different mental health struggles, but like every time you sort of hit a new realization or a new breakthrough, it's like it's a shade of, if Bucky's reintegration is that turned up to 11, you're having those at 2s and 3s or more, but like a lot. But it's a process, right? It takes time, and experiencing that, having the ability to experience that in fiction in a moment, right, is really valuable, because you're going to get on the other side of yours and be like, yes, mine were spread out, but it was the same feeling. And we can sort of get that that concentration, like that extract, that essentialness that's just like rendered down to 1-2 page spread, that I can come back 2 years later and be like, yep, that's exactly how it felt, even though it took me 5 years instead of 5 seconds or whatever. Yeah, really, really powerful stuff. And it's worth saying, obviously, not every comic book is aspiring to be as well put together as this one. They aren't all made like this, but really, the ones that we keep talking about are. I mean, there's something else more to it, even if it's a character. It's not one specific story. It's kind of the feel of the character, because it's what has kind of accreted around them, over time. I would say it's really powerful in any fiction, obviously. I mean, we've all growing up had our like Old Yeller or Bridge to Terabithia moment where we were suddenly, experiencing all the feelings that we'd never had to experience before. But what I appreciate about it in these extremely genred spaces is, oh, they Trojan horse that shit. Like, here we are having a espionage thriller, and then right in the middle of that, let's have a moment where we can all reflect on our mental health struggles. How dare you bastards? Just the audacity of folding both of those things together like it's completely normal and a thing I should expect. Honestly. All right, dear listeners, we have reached everybody's favorite part of the podcast, the favorite part of the story, which we break down into both art and story here on In the Gutter, not because they are necessarily separate, but because we're not sure of a better way to do it, because there are impactful visual moments that are different than the impactful narrative moments, even though they all work together. It's a crystalline structure, really. This has been your science nerd moment. Lonnie, cut all of that. Cut all of the science nerd. All that's out. Jack, please.
Jack, leave it in.
God damn it, it felt like it was going someplace and it wasn't. All right. So we're going to lead with our favorite page of art. Lonnie, tell me about your favorite pieces of visual entertainment in this issue.
Yes, I had a tough time choosing between two. I would say the one that won out eventually was the double page spread with Bucky falling to his knees, remembering who he is. We see all these memories, like imposed on the page, and then he's just in the center, crumbled to the floor. Like, that is amazing, and I absolutely love that. But the close second is the bookended art of Lucan's face superimposed over the Red Skulls. Like, it is a great reveal. Such a fabulous callback to earlier in the series. I loved it. How about you? What did you think? What was your favorite art?
Okay. It's legitimately exactly the same, but my number 1 and number 2 spot are flipped.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I really love the bookend with Lucan, the reveal of Red Skull and Lucan's head. The bookend with the first issue a year and a third ago, forever ago. That doubling of imagery and all that could mean. And that everything just got worse for our heroes and for Lucan in that realization. Now, it's been that way because that's the secondary revelation. Oh, this just got worse. oh no shit, this has actually already been worse is just really, really good.
Yeah.
But that sort of montage double page spread of those memories, and that they are just like pressing in on Bucky, on the Winter Soldier in that moment, and that they are a mix of both Karpov's fuckery and the supposedly good memories with Cap.
Yes.
It's all of it, just like forced into his skull, and he can't figure out how to shuffle those cards together yet. Yeah. It's the same. I just liked one a little bit more than the other, and you liked the other one a little more than the other.
It was a tough call. I'm telling you, it was really hard. All right. So, what's your favorite story moment?
Okay, it's also kind of a visual, but I feel like it works better here because it calls backwards and forwards, like to other things. So
Yes.
you have 2 pages that are very close to one another in here, and one of them is Bucky head and hands at Camp Lehigh, trying to figure out what he does next, with that last memory of becoming Cap's partner. And I guess in a way that's supposed to be a last good memory. It's like the last time he felt good about the horrible shit he was going to have to do the rest of the time. I'm reading in there a little bit, but that's what it says to me. And it harkens back to Cap at the end of the issue where he read the file, head and hands. Yeah. Tony, I can't help you on this one, head and hands. Lucan, I've nearly killed my best friend, head and hands. Like all of these just despairing moments there've really been a lot of them with very similar imagery. The main person in shadow, just like that. And then you turn just a couple of pages later and you have Lucan staring out that piece of art that we both enjoyed so much, realizing that's Red Skull. And this juxtaposition there of Bucky with everybody, but backward, and then forward, it's a very different comparison. Here are 2 men struggling with the monsters that are in their heads. And the same guy, to a certain extent, put those monsters in their heads. Yeah. Like Lucan is who he is because of Karpov, and Bucky was the Winter Soldier for so long because of Karpov. But here, but then everything after that, totally out of their control, really. But they're both struggling with these, monstrous versions of themselves. Loved it. So much going on. Again, it's mostly visual, but it still feels like it has all this like narrative weight because of the call backwards and call forwards. What about yourself?
Oddly, I think my favorite part of this is the reunion that is promised. Is the moment that Cap and Bucky are actually going to reunite, find each other again, and connect. I mean, like we had that moment. No one would understand you if it wasn't for me. And the idea that with everything that both Cap and Bucky have lost, there is something in each other that can heal some of that loss that they both hold, when there's, and this happens a lot, like when animals die, like an animal dies and you're like, this animal has been a witness to my life for this entire 14, 15 years, and that to lose that witness to your life is so hard. And then the idea of they've already lost this in each other, but to get that back is such an incredibly precious thing. And so there's something about the promise of what will come next, that I think is actually like my favorite part. I want to see Cap and Bucky meet again, and I'm very much looking forward to reading that comic.
Oh, I love that. I mean, the idea that the best part of the culmination of the story could be the promise and also threat of the future to make you come back. I don't know if you can say a nicer thing about a finale. Honestly.
Yeah, really. I mean, honestly, it's the thing that makes you want to come back to it and keep reading. All right, everyone, that is it for season 2 of In the Gutter. Joshua and I are both working on our novels this year as part of my Year of Writing Magically workshop. If you're interested in learning more, go to yearofwritingmagically.com and sign up to be notified when applications open again for next year. So In the Gutter is going to be on hiatus for a little while to open up that bandwidth for these other creative projects. Follow Chipperish Media on your various media social to be the first to know when In the Gutter is coming back. Until then, Bucky's a survivor. He's out there somewhere. I know it.
Thanks for listening to In the Gutter with Joshua Unruh and Lani Diane Rich. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider talking about it with your friends, leaving a review somewhere, or supporting Chipperish Media, patreon.com/Chipperish.